On a Saturday morning in April of 1984, at the Saline County Equipment Auction on State Highway 33 outside Crete, Nebraska, a 24-year-old farm mechanic named Reuben Penfield paid $260 cash for a 1954 Studebaker E40 wrecker that had been consigned to the auction by the Kucera estate 3 months earlier. The truck sat at the back of the gravel lot under a tall cottonwood tree that had not yet leafed out for spring. The two-tone cab, marina blue on the bottom and buttercream on the top, had oxidized to a chalky pale blue and a yellowed buttery wax along the upper edges where the Nebraska sun had hit it through 20 Saline County summers. The iconic round Studebaker hood ornament was still mounted on the radiator cap, with most of the chrome flaking off to a dull gunmetal gray. The Holmes 480 boom assembly, mounted on the rear deck, listed to the right at 4 degrees with a frayed and rusted cable. The horizontal chrome grill bars across the front were tarnished to pewter. The side mount spare tire on the passenger fender was flat and dry rotted. The wooden cargo deck behind the cab had rotted through in 2 places. Someone had spray-painted junk across the driver's door in white peeling block letters that had been there since at least 1979. The auctioneer's voice came through the bullhorn flat and tired. "Last lot of the morning, folks. 1954 Studebaker E40 wrecker. Sold as is where is. Came out of the Kucera estate up in Wilber. Engine seized, hydraulics petrified, probably good for the boom and the chains. Do I hear 300? Silence. A meadowlark called from a fence post out past the auction tent. 200? The auctioneer tried. Somebody could pull the boom for scrap. Reuben raised his hand. 260. That's when the laughter started. Cyrus Marlowe, owner of Marlowe Used Equipment on State Highway 33 outside Crete, was leaning against the open tailgate of his white 1983 Ford F, 250, about 20 feet from the Studebaker. Cyrus was 55 years old, 5'9", paunchy with a beer belly hanging over a brown leather belt with a turquoise inlay buckle, balding with a thinning fringe of gray-blonde hair around a shiny crown. Clean-shaven, ruddy face from too many Holmes leggers, mouth wide open in a dry, condescending laugh, with his head thrown slightly back. He wore a beige, short-sleeved plaid shirt with western cut piping at the shoulders and a Marlboro pack in the pocket. Brown polyester slacks pulled high above his waist, brown leather loafers, a heavy gold horseshoe ring on his right pinky, and a faded red bandana tied around his neck, cowboy style. He held a half-eaten Slim Jim in his left hand and waved it toward Reuben dismissively with his right. "Reuben Penfield," Cyrus called from the tailgate of his Ford. "Boy, walk away." Reuben didn't answer. He counted out $260 in 20s from a leather wallet he had had since high school. The money was the last of what he had saved from a year of working on combines at his father Lloyd's farm shop outside Wilber. "Sold to the young man for $260, the auctioneer said quickly, hammering the gavel. Cyrus Marlowe walked over, still grinning, the gold horseshoe ring catching the morning sun. "Son, listen, with respect, that thing is not worth your $260. Otto Kucera bought that Studebaker brand new at the dealership in Lincoln in '54, and it never left Saline County after that. He died of a stroke in his shop last summer. His boy Joseph drove it out to my lot in February and asked me what I would give him. I gave him $40 and a handshake. I couldn't move it. I consigned it to the auction last month, and I have been waiting to see what damn fool would bid on it." Cyrus shook his head dismissively. "Walk away, son. Buy yourself a Ford F-700 that runs. I've got one on my lot, would be yours for $90 a month." "I'll keep this one," Reuben said. "Boy, Otto's truck has been dismissed by every man between Wilber and Lincoln for 6 months. Dismissed. There is a reason for that. It's a 1954 Studebaker E40, Reuben said. Studebakers don't quit on the men who own them. Reuben borrowed a flatbed and hauled the Studebaker 11 miles north to a long pole barn shop behind a small white farmhouse on County Road P, just outside Wilber, Nebraska, where Lloyd Penfield had been running Penfield Farm Mechanics since the day he came home from Korea in 1953. Lloyd was Reuben's father. Lloyd was 62 years old in the spring of 1984, 5'10", broad-shouldered and sturdy with a working man's belly, short steel gray hair combed back, a full gray and brown mustache that drooped slightly at the corners, weathered tan face from 40 years of working under combine canopies, pale watchful blue eyes, large rough hands. He wore a faded olive drab work shirt with 2 chest pockets, brown denim overalls with the bib straps over the shirt, brown leather work boots, and a faded red ball cap with a faded white Massey Ferguson logo above the brim. He stood beside the Studebaker for 2 full minutes without saying a word. Then he took his cap off and ran his palm over the top of his head. "Reuben," Lloyd said, "do you know whose truck that was?" "Otto Kucera's." "Pop," Cyrus Marlowe told me. "Otto Kucera was the best Studebaker mechanic in Saline County for 30 years. His parents brought him over from Pleasant in 1925 when he was 3. His grandfather Václav and his grandmother Marie came across in 1898 with 20 other families from Bohemia and settled the dryland farms north of Wilber. Otto bought that Studebaker new at the Lincoln dealership in '54 for $2,400 cash. He ran a small wrecker service out of his shop on Maple Avenue for 30 years and pulled my own International out of a creek bed in '67 when the corn was rotting in the field. He died of a stroke last July at 61. His wife Annika went of cancer 3 years before him. His boy Joseph couldn't keep up with the shop and consigned the truck. The truck is good. A Studebaker E40 will outlast both of us if you treat it right. Will it run again? Anything will run again. The question is whether you've got the patience to make it. I've got patience. Then you've got a truck. For the next 12 months, Reuben rebuilt the 1954 Studebaker E40 in Lloyd's long pole barn shop. He worked nights after his shifts on the combine work and full days on Saturdays. He worked alongside Lloyd on the engine and alone on everything else. He pulled the Studebaker 232 cubic inch straight 6 and disassembled it on butcher paper laid on the concrete floor. The cylinders were so badly pitted that he had to bore them 60 thousandths over and run sleeves. He ground every valve. He replaced every gasket from a kit Lloyd ordered through a Studebaker parts collector in South Bend. The hydraulic system on the Holmes 480 boom was full of black sludge that smelled like a stock tank. He flushed it 3 times with kerosene, replaced every seal, rebuilt the hand pump. He pulled the main fuel tank and the smaller auxiliary fuel tank that hung beside it on the passenger side frame rail and cleaned both of them in solvent. The main tank had 3 pinhole rust spots. He brazed them shut. The auxiliary tank sounded different when he tapped it with a screwdriver. It rang flatter than a fuel tank should ring. He thought the welds were thicker on the inside than on the main tank. He shrugged. He wire-wheeled the outside, primed it, shot it black with rattle cans, and bolted it back onto the frame rail. He never cut into it. He never opened it. He never thought to. There were nights when Reuben slept on a folding cot in the back of Lloyd's shop because the drive home was 20 minutes and not worth the gas. There were Sunday mornings when Lloyd's wife, Helen, brought down a covered casserole and a thermos of coffee, and the three of them ate together on a wooden bench outside the open barn doors and didn't say much. By April of 1985, the Studebaker was running. Reuben turned the key on a cold Sunday morning, and the 232 straight six caught on the second try and idled rough for 40 seconds, and then smoothed into the steady mechanical hum that the engineers in South Bend had built it to make in 1954. Lloyd stood in the open barn doorway with his massy Ferguson cap in his hand. He didn't say anything for a long minute. Then he said, "Otto Kucera would be glad of that, Reuben. Take care of it." Reuben painted Penfield Recovery on both doors of the Studebaker in white block letters with a red drop shadow. He registered a business license at the Saline County Clerk's office in Wilber. He printed business cards at a print shop in Crete and left them at every grain elevator, every gas station, and every farm supply co-op within 60 miles. The first call came on a wet Wednesday morning in May 1985. A wheat farmer named Wendell Boone had buried his 1976 John Deere 4630 combine up to the rear axle in soft black mud on a fire road outside Friend. Wendell had already called Marlowe Used Equipment because Cyrus also ran a small wrecker on the side. Cyrus had quoted him $400 and a 6-hour wait. Wendell said he did not have $400 and his wheat was going to be soaked through by then. Reuben pulled the combine out in 31 minutes with the Holmes 480 boom and the hand crank. Wendell paid him $50 and 3 bushels of seed wheat. By the end of 1985, Reuben had pulled 24 combines, 6 grain trucks, 3 pickup trucks, and a school bus that had slid into a creek outside Western out of various corners of Saline and Jefferson counties. The Studebaker started in cold weather. The Studebaker ran in heat. The Studebaker went down access roads where Cyrus's modern wreckers could not fit. By 1989, Reuben had 2 regular contracts, one with the Saline County Sheriff and one with the Nebraska State Patrol Barracks at Crete. He bought a second wrecker, a 1976 GMC 6500, but he kept doing the rough calls in the Studebaker. Cyrus Marlowe still saw Reuben at the diner in Crete most Tuesday mornings. Cyrus had a regular booth in the back. Cyrus always made the same joke. "How's the Kucera truck, Penfield? Still running on seed wheat and casserole?" "Still running, Cyrus." "You ever pull a real truck with that thing?" "Pulled one of yours out of a ditch off Highway 33 last weekend. Your boy left the keys in it." Cyrus stopped joking after that one. By 1993, Marlowe Used Equipment lost its supplier contract when a regional chain bought up his rival in Lincoln. By 1997, Cyrus had let the lot go to the bank and was working as a parts driver for a Napa distributor out of Beatrice. By 2004, Reuben had 4 trucks and a real shop with a poured concrete floor and 4 roll-up doors on Linden Avenue in Crete. Penfield Recovery had 2 contracts with the Saline County Sheriff, one with the Nebraska DOT for the US 77 corridor between Beatrice and Lincoln, and a side arrangement with the Saline County Volunteer Fire Department that paid in barbecue and kolache. He had married a school librarian named Petra Holman in 1991, and their 3 children were 11, 9, and 6. In June of 2004, the Studebaker's main fuel tank finally rusted through a 4th pinhole in the seam along the rear baffle, and Reuben pulled both tanks off the frame rail on a warm Saturday morning in the south bay of his shop to braze the new leak and inspect the auxiliary tank he had never opened. The main tank he set on a steel rack. The auxiliary tank he hefted onto his workbench under a clip-on lamp. It rang strangely under his knuckle, the way it had rung in 1984. He set a fine-tooth metal saw against the welded seam along the lower edge and cut a slow rectangular hole 8 inches by 4 inches through the outer wall. When he lifted the cut steel piece free of the tank and looked inside, he saw that the entire interior had been divided in 1958 by a stainless steel baffle plate welded along the center line. One half of the tank had once held about 3 gallons of gasoline. The other half, sealed behind the baffle, was bone dry and held a wooden cigar box wrapped in oilcloth and tied with brown twine. Reuben stared at it for a long minute. Then he reached into the tank with a long pair of needle-nose pliers and drew the bundle out through the cut. The oilcloth was stiff but unbroken. The twine had hardened to the consistency of waxed rope. He carried the bundle to his workbench under the clip-on lamp and cut the twine and unfolded the oilcloth 2 layers deep. Inside the oilcloth, wrapped in a 3rd layer of soft chamois, sat a small wooden cigar box from a pleasant tobacconist. Inside the cigar box were 6 things. The first was a small leather-bound Bible. The leather cracked, but the gold leaf cross on the cover still bright. The inside front page inscribed to Otto Kucera in 1894. The second was a pair of plain gold wedding rings, one larger and one smaller, both engraved on the inside, with the date 12 Chervna 1894 and the initials VK and MK. The third was a small tarnished silver crucifix on a thin chain, the back stamped with the plus-end silversmith mark. The fourth was a small black and white daguerreotype mounted in a leather case showing a young bohemian couple in their 20s standing stiff in studio clothes against a painted backdrop of a forest, the man with a thick mustache and the woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun. The fifth was a small canvas pouch containing 23 Mexican silver pesos from the 1880s and 1890s, the silver still bright. The sixth was a folded letter on 2 sheets of cream stationery, dated 14 Srpna 1958, in a careful, old-world hand in Czech. The letter was to Otto from his mother Marta on her deathbed. She wrote in Czech that she was dying and that she wanted Otto to keep the rings and the Bible and the silver and the daguerreotype and the pesos saved from his brother František, who had spent his life selling family things at the Crete pawn shop for whiskey money. She asked Otto to hide everything where František would never find it and where Otto's own son would find it someday when he was old enough to want it. The letter was signed, Tvoje matka Marta Kucherova. Reuben put the letter down on the workbench. He sat on a wooden stool in his own shop and read it again. He could not read the check, but he could see his name was not in it, and he could see the date and the signature, and he could see the 8 crosses Marta had drawn in the margin beside the names of the items. Then he closed the cigar box and the oilcloth back up and drove home, and didn't tell Petra until after dinner. On the next Monday, Reuben drove to the Wilber Public Library and asked the librarian to translate the letter. Then he drove to the Saline County Records Office and asked the clerk to pull whatever she could find on Joseph Kucera. Joseph Václav Kucera had been born at Crete Memorial Hospital on August 19th of 1954. His mother, Annika Kucera, had died of breast cancer in 1981 at the age of 57. His father, Otto Kucera, had died of a stroke at his shop on Maple Avenue in Wilber on July 22nd of 1983 at the age of 61. Joseph had married a woman named Margaret Voss in 1977 and had 3 children, Otto Jr., Marta, and Anton. He lived in a small 2-story farmhouse on County Road N north of Wilber on the original Kucera homestead his great-grandfather Václav had broken to wheat in 1898. He was 50 years old in the summer of 2004 and farmed 300 acres of dryland wheat. Reuben called the farmhouse on a Tuesday evening. He told Joseph who he was and what he had found welded inside the auxiliary fuel tank of his father's Studebaker. There was a long silence on the line. Then Joseph Kucera said in a quiet voice, "Reuben, you'd better bring the Studebaker out to the farm and bring everything." Reuben drove the Studebaker north on County Road N to the original Kucera homestead on a clear Saturday morning in late June. Joseph met him in the graveled driveway of a small 2-story white clapboard farmhouse with a row of cottonwoods planted in 1898. Joseph Kucera was 50 years old, 5'11", lean and weathered from a lifetime on the wheat. Short steel-gray hair, clean-shaven, sun-tanned face with deep crow's feet, calm, steady, pale blue eyes. He wore a faded blue chambray work shirt under a pair of denim bib overalls, brown leather work boots, and a faded brown leather welder's cap pushed back on his head. He read the librarian's translation of his grandmother's 1958 letter, standing in his own front yard in the warm Nebraska June sun. He held his great-grandparents' wedding rings in his open right palm for a long time. He looked at the daguerreotype of his great-grandfather Václav and his great-grandmother Marie. Then he looked up at Reuben Penfield and said, "My father never told me about any of this." "Mr. Kucera," Reuben said, "he was waiting until he could bear to. The stroke didn't give him the chance." Joseph Kucera started crying then. He invited Reuben inside and called his son Otto Jr. at the dairy barn behind the house and told him to come up to the kitchen immediately because great-grandfather Václav had finally come home. Cyrus Marlowe died of liver failure in 2009 in a single-wide trailer outside Beatrice. Lloyd Penfield died in his sleep in 2014 at the age of 92, and Reuben buried him in the Wilber Cemetery beside his wife, Helen. By 2024, the 1954 Studebaker E40 was 70 years old and still ran. Reuben kept it in the front bay of the Penfield Recovery Shop on Linden Avenue in Crete. The daguerreotype and the librarian's translation of Marta Kucherova's 1958 letter hung in shadow boxes on the back wall of the shop, with a small brass plaque underneath that read simply, "He hid them from his brother." The wedding rings stayed at the Kucera farmhouse on County Road N. The boys who used to dismiss Reuben Penfield do not dismiss anyone anymore. Most of them do not remember dismissing him, but Reuben remembers. And every time a young man asks him whether to buy a cheap old wrecker that the local dealer is dismissing, Reuben tells him the same thing his father Lloyd told him in the spring of 1984. Anything will run again. The question is whether you've got the patience to make it. And sometimes the truck is carrying a family across an ocean one more time.